I'm glad that you're here today. We started a brand new series with you about 2 weeks ago on just uncovering the uncensored truths about love, sex, marriage, and dating. We've talked about dating, and we talked about how to date. We talked about marriage a little bit. We're going to talk some more next week. We're going to end the whole series next week. A couple of weeks ago, we started out with this idea that, you know what, if I marry the right person, everything will turn out all right. If I marry the right kind of person, because in fairy tale land, if you marry the right person, everybody lives happily ever after. That's right. But if you've been married for any length of time, you just know that sometimes your spouse tries your patience. But maybe when you were dating them, you didn't work on patience because you didn't think, because they're such a perfect person, that they would never try your patience. You thought if I marry the right person, everything will turn out all right. In fact, some of us think that if I marry the right person, they will supplement every weak area in my life. And if you have that mentality, what we tend to do is just draw the life out of that person until there's no life left in them. Because we're trying to use what they're strong in and what we are weak in to supplement us. And pretty soon we just draw all the life out of that relationship, and when there's nothing left, we go on to find somebody else. So we found out that it's better to become the right person than to try to find the right person. Last week, we talked a little bit about honoring and honoring women. We talked about how to honor women and honor our wives and honor the ladies that we want to date. We kind of delved into the issue of pornography a little bit. Coincidentally, if you want to watch any of these messages, our illustrious Kevin puts them on YouTube. You can go to our website and link up to YouTube and watch any of these if you want to go back again. So we've talked about dating. We've talked about marriage a little bit. So today's the sex talk. I'm going to talk to you like a dad, to both singles and married people. We're going to talk about some very sensitive things. Some of the things we're going to talk about are going to evoke some emotion and some memories in you. Mom and Dad, if this starts a dialogue between you and your students, that would be great. I don't know how it is in your house or was in your house. We didn't talk about sex in my house. You're supposed to just kind of get it or figure it out. And you know, how many remember being a little kid and you watched, when you were young enough, and you watched people on TV kiss? It was embarrassing. Did you blush? We said things like, oh, mush, oh, that's gross. And now what you watch on TV, oh my goodness, wow. There's no imagination. And the reason that we're talking about sex in church is because the church has been so silent on it, but the world that we live in, your television set, your internet, your social media, the world around you, the people in the locker room, the guys at work, everybody's talking about it. We don't talk about it in church. And yet God invented it. I'm thinking if anybody knows anything about sex, it should be the guy that made it, correct? And so we're going to go to the Word of God, and we're going to talk about sex today a little bit. And one of the myths that we talked about a couple of weeks ago in relationship is that if we just find the right person, everything will turn out right. Now, when it comes to sex, there's a myth about sex as well. And the myth that our culture really is a proponent of is this, that it's just physical. It's just physical. In fact, it really doesn't matter. It was a Saturday night. It was a spring break. It was, hey, we just got together with some friends. It really doesn't matter as long as nobody gets an STD. We were using protection. It was no emotional involvement. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got beat up. As long as we just play it safe and play by the rules, it's okay. Because after all, it's just physical. You know, it's kind of a recreational act. There's badminton, there's tennis, there's swimming, and there's sex. It's just kind of a recreational thing, right? You know? And so that's the myth that our world talks about. The TV shows you watch about, it's just physical. The media that you read, it's just physical. Some of the relationships that you've been in, out, and just bounced in and out, it was just physical, wasn't it? But the myth is that it's just physical, but the reality is it's more than physical. It's very emotional. In fact, sexual contact between people, and when we talk about sex, we're talking about all sexual contact. Look, it hits us, it affects us at the deepest emotional places in our lives. I'm telling you, sex is not just physical. It is extremely emotional, and that's exactly the way God designed it to be, and we'll get into that as we look into the Word a little bit. Now, to get us all on the same page and help you understand where I'm coming from, that sex isn't just physical, it's emotional as well. I want to get us all on the same page and understand that it's emotional. Because if it was just physical, let me ask you some questions. Let me ask you questions. If sex was only physical, why is it that when a little girl who's been molested grows up and starts to connect the dots of life and starts to figure things out a little bit about life, why is it that she carries with her this deep emotional baggage into her adult life that she just can't seem to shake? It doesn't go away. It affects the way she sees herself. Some would say, well, she just was betrayed by an adult. All of us have been betrayed by an adult. It wasn't betrayal, because betrayal doesn't leave the emotional scars like molestation does. Why is it that when a little boy's been molested, when a little boy has been abused or molested by another man or even a woman, why is it that he carries with him this deep, seething anger with him in his life? And it just is the overtone of everything about life and how he sees life. Because if it was only just a physical thing, there would be no emotional baggage. We could say to that girl or that boy that was molested as a kid, just say, well, just get over it. But it's more than physical, isn't it? Let me ask you this. If sex was only physical, why is it that rape is being more than just being beat up? Because see, if she was just beat up, the wounds heal, the scars heal, and she can just kind of move on to that whole kind of thing and just forget about it. But why is it that when a woman is beat up, she's just beat up, she may report this to the police. But when she's raped, there's a guilt and a shame and a sense of responsibility that goes along with that. She doesn't feel like she can call the police. I think I know the answer to that question, because sex is more than just physical, it's very emotional. Why is it that men that have the deep-seated sexual addictions in their life, why is it that men that have the deep sexual addictions in their life, not just the casual view of a pornographic image or they just flash it across the screen, but men that are immersed in pornography, why is it that men are involved in pornography have either no father in their house or a father who's just totally disinterested in their child? Because see, men long for that relationship. Boys long for that relationship with their dads. And when they don't have that kind of relationship with their dads, this anger arises within them. And then when the anger comes there's this soothing, this calming effect, this escapism that takes place when immersed in pornography. Why is it that people's deepest regrets in life are centered around some sexual event? Maybe on the deathbed, maybe confessing to the pastor. Rob and I have heard stories. Why is it that the deepest regrets in a person's life start out with something like, I've never told this to anybody before, and I'm not sure I want to tell it now. But when I was 17, while I was engaged to, I was with, and you fill in the blanks. I'm telling you that sex is more than just physical, it's very emotional. And it's something that God invented. And I want you to understand this morning that when God made you, He made you with such incredible, incredible value. You are so valuable to Him. Your sexuality is so valuable to Him that the intimacy that He wants to create between you and the person that you marry is so honored and to be honored by you. It is so honorable. In fact, when God created sex, it was an amazing thing. He said, when you guys come together as a husband and a wife, as a man and a woman, one man, one woman for the rest of your life, when you guys engage in that sexual intimacy, I want you to experience the kind of relationship I want to have with you. Face-to-face, full-on, absolute trust, complete trust, intimacy that goes beyond anything that you could experience physically. So God invented this thing called sex, and we read about it all the way back in the book of Genesis. He invented it. He started it. Started with mice, camels, donkey, whatever, the whole thing, and he kind of went down the line. And then he got to us. He made us. He made humanity. And I got this brilliant idea. Oh, I know what I'm going to do to really spice up the marriage between a husband and a wife. Angels are saying, what's that? Oh, never mind. You won't appreciate this. Yeah, it's just an amazing thing. Let me go. And then that's the way God created it to be, just full-on, absolute intimacy. That when there is something between a husband and wife, this trust level that is at the deepest, deepest level. God says that's the kind of relationship I want to have with my creation. Full-on, no regrets, absolute trust, absolute intimacy. And that sexual union between a husband and wife, that's going to represent that kind of trust that I want to have with the people that follow me. The unfortunate thing is that the culture that we live in cheapens sexuality. The TV shows that you watch cheapen sexuality. It cheapens people. It cheapens the relationships. And what happens when it gets cheap is people just get passed from one relationship to the next. from this relationship to the next relationship, from one person to the other person. And what happens is when you are no longer just one with one, you start to turn numb. Because our culture cheapens sexuality, and all of a sudden men and women in a marital situation, they finally get married, and why am I not feeling the kind of intimacy I want to have with my spouse? It's because you have just turned numb from your sexual past. Because you carried all of that with you. You've made that problem for yourself. And I'm telling you, the reason I'm sharing this with you today is because I want to set you up for success in your marriages. If you're single today, I want to set you up for success in your relationship. If you don't get this, you're going to understand that when you sin sexually, what we're going to look in the Word of God, you know who you sin against? You sin against yourself. And we avoid sexual sin not to curry the favors of God, not because God's going to rain down hellfire and brimstone and He's going to hate me more and judge me more because of the sexual things in my life. It's to save you from yourself. We're going to see this in the Word of God in just a minute. Okay. The incredible thing is that religions, the history of religion, has not really spoken well about fidelity in marriage or sexual purity in marriage. In fact, on a whole, if you look at the religions of the world, it's always surrounded itself around some sort of sexuality. You can read about it even in the Old Testament when they set up Asherah poles and the god Baal. It was all about fertility, and it was all about just having free sex. In fact, when Moses goes up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments from God, Moses is having this incredible mountaintop experience, forgive the pun, with God, getting the 10 Commandments. He's up there for 40 days. While he's up there having this holy moment, all of the people that he brought out of Egypt, the 1 million+ Israelites, they were down at the base of the mountain. Guess what they're doing? They are sinning their brains out, and a lot of it was about sex. Now, on that note, guys, just hang with me for a little bit. Guys, let's say that you were Moses. I want to tell you that the rules that God gave concerning sex, I can prove to you they're God thing. It's not a man thing, it's a God thing. Because men, if you were Moses and you went up on the mountain and you were the one that claimed that you heard from God about how we're supposed to conduct our lives, and you came down from the mountain, what would be one of the rules you'd make? It'd be the same kind of rule a lot of cult leaders have made. I can have as many women as I want, and I can do with them whatever I want. God said, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. I don't want you to commit adultery. Not because, that's a worse sin than the other 9. It's because I put so much value in you and your relationship one with another. So we're going to look at all this. In fact, 2,000 years ago, a guy named Paul writes a letter to a church in Corinth. So if you brought a Bible today, you brought a device with you want to follow along, we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul is writing to this church in the city of Corinth. In the city of Corinth, there was this huge temple. And they worshiped this goddess. And coincidentally, the way that you worship this goddess was a lot of times to go sleep with a temple prostitute. That was the culture of the city of Corinth. And Paul starts a church in the city. Now, the incredible thing is that the culture of the whole temple and all of that was going on there infiltrated into the church. It's like they found this newfound faith in Jesus Christ, but they hadn't really shed all of their old habits and old ways of worship. And so into this, Paul begins to speak. In fact, Paul is going to say the very thing that I've just told you for the last 15 minutes. And when Paul walks through the Roman culture and the Greek culture, I would imagine Paul's thinking, didn't anybody tell you how damaging sexual sin can be? Didn't anybody tell you about this? This is just amazing. He's walking through the Greek and the Roman culture, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. In fact, that slavery was completely legal. You could buy people, you could sell people, and if you had female slaves, you could do whatever you wanted to with the female slaves. Prostitution was legal. It was encouraged in that kind of a culture. And all of that was influencing and having an effect on the church. Aren't you glad that everything has changed so much 2,000 years later? I say that with tongue-in-cheek there. Okay, so anyway, I am so far ahead of my notes right now, I have no clue where I am. So just bear with me as I find my place, would you? All right. So we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, beginning in verse number 18. Listen to what Paul says. Run from sexual sin. He doesn't say run from sex. He says run from sexual sin. Run, baby, run. I mean, run from sexual sin. Don't negotiate with it. Don't try to rationalize with it. Don't think about it. Don't think that you can maneuver around it. Don't think that you're smarter than sexual sin. Run. It is like the firecracker that you lit. And they make because they know who lights firecrackers. Kids. So they have to make directions really simple on firecrackers. Light fuse, get away, right? So nobody stands over the firecracker and go, look at that fuse burn. You light that, you just light that baby and you run. And with that same kind of running, Paul says when it comes to sexual sin, run. Get out of there. And he tells us why, and I'm so glad he tells us why. Look what he says in the rest of the verse. Look, no other sin. There's all kinds of sin. We know all about sin. There's greed. You can steal stuff from people. I mean, you can lie, all those kinds of things. There's all kinds of sins, but no other sin so clearly affects the body like this one does. This sin has a unique category. This one affects people differently than other sins. Not sex, sexual sin. Anything outside of the confines of a monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. I'm just telling you, when I talk about sex, it is between a man and a woman. Not a man and a man, not a woman and a woman. This is about a man and a woman. Because anything out of that is a sexual sin, and that's kind of stuff, Paul says, run from it. Run from it because it affects you. Look, it'll have physical effects, but it affects you emotionally deeper than other things do. I could stand up here and talk about homosexuality and that whole. Look, I don't need to say that. Paul is saying it right here. Run from it, not because it makes you a bad person, not because you're an evil person with homosexuality, not because you're just untouchable and nobody loves you and just all that kind of stuff. He's saying, look, I care about you so much. I want you to know and understand that nothing affects you so deeply, so emotionally like sexual sin. And I want to spare you of that because I love you and I care about you. And that's the motivation for this pastor standing up before you today talking about this thing. He tells them really what we've just talked about for the last 15, 20 minutes. Run, not because God will judge you worse, not because He'll hate you more. Run so that you can spare yourself the emotional pain that goes along with it. He goes on to say, now this little word for is the explanation. Look what he says. For sexual immorality is a sin against who? It's a sin against your own body. It's not a sin against the neighbor girl. It's not a sin against the guy that you're dating. It's not a sin against the girl that you're living with. It's not a sin against whoever. It's a sin against your own body. This one affects you. This one hurts you. That's why I want you to spare yourself of this kind of pain and just stay away from it. I'm telling you, this stuff is in the Bible. I don't know if you've read this in the Bible, understood this in the Bible, if your parents talked about this whole kind of thing. Do you remember the whole sex talk with your mom or with your dad? Do you remember that? It probably took like 5 minutes or less. It was awkward for your parent. It was more awkward for you, and nobody made eye contact, and you couldn't wait till it was done, and that's over, right? Remember that whole thing? Okay. And yet Paul is talking about this stuff 2,000 years ago. Because, listen, nothing has changed about people. Nothing's changed. Same problems they dealt with then, they're dealing with today. It's the same stuff. Look, he says it's a sin against your own body. And when you sin sexually, you hurt yourself at such a deep level. You begin to destroy the intimacy that God wants for you and wants for you to have in a kind of a marriage. I'm telling you that sexual purity leads to sexual intimacy. Single people, listen to me. Listen to me, single people. Sexual purity leads to sexual intimacy. Well, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. In the marriage, you know what makes sexuality so amazing in a marriage is the trust relationship between the husband and the wife. You know what makes intimacy so amazing between you and God is the trust relationship that you have with God. And God can trust us. He goes on to say, now he backs up a little bit. I'm going to back up a little bit in verse number 16. Verse 16, he's going to make it real here, because remember the whole temple prostitute thing I told you about a moment ago. He says, don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one with her in body? And not just with a prostitute, but with anybody that he would join himself to sexually, you become one in body, to which the guys that were hearing this letter read in the church in Corinth for the first time would have said, what are you talking about? I wasn't wanting with anybody. I wasn't joining a prostitute. I wasn't joining or wanting. It was just a one-night thing. It was just a, hey, we just met in the bar. We had a drink together. And it was just a good time. I didn't join anything. Paul goes, no, 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 no. You don't understand the way God made sex. It's not just physical. It's emotional. It's deeper than just physical. You need to understand that. There might have been a pushback when they first heard this. Because when you become one with more than one, Paul is saying, look, I want to spare you the pain. When you become one with more than one, you start to turn numb. And what the Bible does is gives value to this incredible thing called intimacy and sexual intimacy. Let me just tell you something. Ladies, I don't know how girls talked in the locker room in high school, but I know how guys talked in the locker room. So guys, maybe you're in high school right now, maybe you're talking, you're thinking, whatever the whole thing is, and you come to church on Sunday morning, and you can put on the church face for me, and you can act like the whole church thing, but look, when you go off to school, it's a whole different world, I get that. Now here's the dialogue, here's the thinking, this is the mentality amongst guys. Guys wanted to date a girl who would, but they wanted to marry a girl who hadn't. I think there's something written in the DNA and in the code of all of us that says, you know what, there's value to this thing. But the culture that we live in says, no, 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 look, it's just a fun thing. It's just a recreational activity. No big deal with this. But I think there's something deep inside of us that says, no, there's more to it than just being physical. Verse number 16, he jumps back now to Genesis chapter 2. He says, look, the two are united into one. The two are united into one. That something happens. In fact, Paul says in another place in one of his letters, he says, the two become one, and this is a mystery. That there is some supernatural union that takes place between a man and a woman in the confines of marriage when they come together sexually. He says something amazing happens, the two become one, and you can't un-one what God has made one. I've illustrated it like this before. It's like having a cold glass of milk. Not that almond milk junk or whatever it is. Like that's not even milk. I mean, you ever tried to milk an almond? Get real. I don't know where they get that stuff. It's white. That's the only resemblance it has to. I'm talking about milk. Milk, you know? And you get that glass of cold milk out there, and you get your big box of Nestle's Quick Powder with a little bunny rabbit on the front, and you just start scooping one in the milk, one in the mouth, one in the milk, one in the mouth. You make yourself, and you start to stir and stir and stir. And then if you really want to challenge somebody in your house, take that glass of chocolate milk and give it to them and say, now take the chocolate out of the milk again, would you? And they'd give you a scientific answer. Well, is it a suspension, a mixture, or a solution? You know, that whole thing. But anyway, all the science people understood that thing. You can't take the chocolate out. Paul's saying, look, when the two become one, you can't. It's the way it is. You can sleep with other people. You can have sex with all kinds of people. But the first one is always different than everyone because God made it that way. Verse 19, no, he kind of goes a little deeper here. Verse 19, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? They understood the temple thing because there was this temple to this goddess and they'd worship the fertility goddess and all that kind of thing. They understood that thing, or even to the Jews they would understand. He's got a non-Jewish audience here, but they would understand you went to a temple and you worshiped. But when Jesus was crucified and resurrected again, God said, we're changing it all up. I'm putting the temple inside of you. Guess where worship happens? It happens in you. You are special. It's not about the building anymore. It's about you. You are very special. And don't you know that I put my Holy Spirit inside of you, that temple? And it's the Spirit of God who lives in you, and He was given to you by God. He goes on to verse number 20. He says, you don't belong to yourself. Well, that's kind of a heavy thought, isn't it? You're not your own anymore. He says, because God bought you with a high price. Well, what was the price? His Son, Jesus. You belong to Him now. I want you to understand something. This is the paradox about becoming a Christian. You can be set free from sin, but as soon as you're set free from sin in your old life, you become a slave to Jesus. But there's no better taskmaster than Jesus Himself. He bought us like we're in the slave market. We were slaves to sin, and Jesus pounded the gavel and said, I got blood shed for that one. I'll take that one. I'll take that one and that one and that one. We dance and jump and leap, and we're just excited because we're set free. And then he goes on to say in the rest of that verse, he says, since you're not your own, you know what you need to do? Honor God with your body. Honor God with your body. As a college student, away from mom and dad, you honor God with your body. Businessman, you're on a business trip, you're living out here in Williston, you're away from your wife and kids back home, you honor God with your body. Ladies, when you're away from your husbands and you're out with the girls and having a great time, you honor God with your body. High school student, listen, you honor God with your body. That's just what he says. It's so plain. And you say, now look, I know where the pushback comes from. You say, look, Pastor, look, I would expect to hear a message like this in church, right? This is a church message. This is a Bible message. Pastor, get real. That's not the real world. That's not reality. That's not where people live. And I'll do with my body whatever I want to do with my body. Look, that's good for you, Pastor, but for me it's a little different. There's pushback, there's resistance to it because of the relationship you're in or the way you want to live your life. I get that. But this is not about preference. This is about predictability. This is about predictability. If you want to continue living the lifestyle, I can predict your future. It's kind of like eating. If you eat at McDonald's 3 times a day with a Twinkie for dessert, I can kind of predict what's going to happen physically, right? By the same token, if you exercise, get plenty of rest, and eat right, and take Geritol every day, you'll live to 112. There's a predictable outcome in that whole thing, all right? I'm just telling you, if you want to live the life, there's a predictable outcome. You'll become numb. You'll become wounded. You become hollow. And you kind of miss all that God has for you. Now, I know how it is when you're single, the thinking you might never say it in these words. Well, you know what, Pastor, before I get married, I want to practice because practice makes perfect. I'm just out practicing. But you can practice all you want to, but I've never seen the bride and the groom standing in the front of the church and having this dialogue. Hey, before we get married, before we say our vows, I'm just kind of curious about something. Did you do a lot of practicing before you got married? I practiced a lot. Oh, good, I practiced too. Tonight should be amazing. Thank you so much for practicing. I'm glad you practiced with all those guys. Nobody ever says anything like that. You say, Pastor, well, don't you like before you buy a car, you want to kick the tires, right? Look, you don't need to do this because I'm pretty sure that if you take a man and a woman on their wedding day and they go off on their honeymoon and you stick them in a dark room, I'm pretty sure they'll figure it out on their own. I don't think any practicing is necessary. Okay? Are you uncomfortable so far? All right, anyway, we'll just keep going, all right? I'm telling you, if you want romance in the marriage, you know where romance in the marriage comes from? It comes from being exclusive. It comes from being exclusive, that there is a deep level of trust. That when I go out of town and I'm on a trip somewhere and my wife is back home, that my wife does not have to worry about me coming home with lipstick on the collar and perfume on my clothes. She just knows that she can trust me. She knows what websites I'm not going to. She knows what TV shows I'm not going to. She knows that when I come home, I'm all hers. Trust in the relationship breeds that kind of romance that when my wife is out of town, it's girls' night out, and I don't have to worry about her. I don't have guys, if you're texting her all the time, calling her all the time, every 5 minutes, where are you, who are you with? There's no romance in that. That's distrust. That's not even romantic. Romance comes from that deep level of trust and intimacy that you feel on emotional level as well as the physical with your spouse. Well, look, I know that we just shared a lot of things that can bring up all kinds of feelings. A little uncomfortable, maybe some bad memories, maybe some guilt, maybe some remorse. But the good news is that we can always start new with God. Now, let me give you just 2 points, and here's the way we're going to do things today. We're going to take communion at the end, and I'll explain more about communion because I realize some of you, this is your first Sunday, you're new. I'm going to read to you some scripture while we take communion that really addresses the kind of healing that I want you to experience before you go home today. Let me give you 2 practical things to do before you leave today. Single people, just hear me out. Married people, this can apply to you as well, but single people, listen to me. Let me give you 2 very practical things that you can do right now. Number one, determine the story that you want to tell your spouse when you get married. Because you know what happens in a lot of marriages? You've been with anybody? No, I saved myself for you. You've been with anybody? No, I saved myself for you. They get married. Somewhere along the line, there's a bump in the marriage. and you find out that he was with her, you find out that she was with him, you lied to me. Why did you lie? You said that you hadn't been with anybody. And I'll tell you why they told the lie, because it's not just physical. It's emotional. And I didn't want to tell you about it. I'm ashamed about it. I was embarrassed about it. You need to decide now the story that you want to tell on your wedding day. Now, there's a couple of possibilities that you can tell on wedding day. You can say, honey, this is our wedding day, and yeah, I've fooled around a lot. I've been a lot of girls in my life, and I just loved them and left them, and, I just kind of was, it was just, I was the, and, it was all about the pursuit and that whole thing. But today is our wedding day, and, honey, I am completely dedicated to you, and I promise I'll never have a wandering eye again. Right. That's what she's thinking. Or you could tell this story. Honey, I've lived a life that I regret. And there was a lot of girls, a lot of girlfriends. And I was enjoying myself. And one Sunday, somebody invited me to church because they promised some pizza afterwards. And so I went. And this preacher, who's blind and talks too fast sometimes, started talking about sex and how we're supposed to honor our future spouses and how God sees us and loves us. And I need to just change some things. And you know what? That day I said yes to God and no to my selfishness. And I became a new person. From that day forward, I dated with you in mind. I was thinking about you the whole time. Even though I didn't know you, I was waiting just for you. I wanted all of me to be saved for only you. Wouldn't that be a great story to tell? If maybe that's where you are this morning. Another thing that you can do, single people, is this. Just decide now what you will and will not do with your body. Not only single people, but married people as well. On the business trip, when you're away from your family, when there's nobody watching you and you're all by yourself, you just need to decide now what you will and will not do with your body. I'm telling you, single people, all right, single people, listen. First date. You're sitting at the restaurant, the pizza's been ordered, you're just getting all the grease off of your fingers, and then you reach over and you pull a napkin out of the napkin holder and you pull a pen out of your pocket or out of the purse and you say, all right, just so you know, this is our first date, I think there's a future for us, but I just want you to know this is what I will not do with my body. And you start going down the list right there and just turn it around and show it to the other person. What do you say? Well, what a coincidence. You should say that. I was thinking the same thing. All right, wouldn't that be a great first date? You need to decide before you get into this too far what you will and will not do with your body. I know teenagers listening to me going, that guy's whacked. I'd never do that. You're just protecting yourself. And here's the thing. Single people, look, I know the pressure that you live under. Because the pressure to engage physically, sexually, is all around us all the time. And if your mama doesn't like who you're dating, if your mama is not real happy about it, there might be a reason, because mama knows the emotional baggage she herself carries, and she wants to spare you of that. And if the guy you're dating, if the girl you're dating doesn't have the same values that you have going into that relationship, you are setting yourself up for hurts, because there's going to be pressure there. I'll tell you what, I'm just telling you, okay? It's the pressure's there when you start dating, and then you start dating, and then you start holding hands. You know how this is? There's hand holding, and then there's super hand holding. I mean, have you seen super hand holding? You've never seen anybody hold hands like super hand holders. I mean, it's just amazing how they can hold hands. And then they start touching each other, hugging each other, smelling each other. It's just an incredible thing going on. And then they're alone, and the passions start to rise. And then if you don't believe me, listen to single people. The day you get engaged, should we get married? Let's get married. And you get down on one knee and present the ring. It's like, hey, we're going to get married anyway. What's the big deal? And I'm just telling you, men and women that surrendered and compromised to those passions before the marriage carried regret into the marriage. Do you know why? Do you know why? Because sex isn't just physical. It's emotional. If sex was only physical, there would be no such thing as pornography. I'm telling you, I share these things with you so that you can spare yourself a lot of hurt in the future.